Hello, online pipe community. Ethan, parsimonious piper, and I am joined again today by,
Butter Piper.
and we are diving right into the next chapter of C.S. Lewis Screwtape Letters. We are up to number 19 now. Well, this week is my week to read. Let me dive right in. My dear Wormwood, I've been thinking very hard about the question in your last letter. If, as I have clearly shown, all selves are by their very nature in competition, and therefore the enemy's idea of love is a contradiction in terms, what becomes of my reiterated warning that he really loves the human vermin and really desires their freedom and continued existence? I hope, my dear boy, you have not shown my letters to anyone. Not that it matters, of course. Anyone would see that the appearance of heresy into which I have fallen is purely accidental. By the way, I hope you understand, too, that some apparently uncomplimentary references to Slubgob were purely jocular. I really have the highest respect for him. And of course, some things I said about not shielding you from the authorities were not seriously meant. You can trust me to look after your interests. But do keep everything under lock and key. The truth is, I slipped by mere carelessness into saying that the enemy really loves the humans. That, of course, is an impossibility. He is one being, they are distinct from him. Their good cannot be his. All his talk about love must be a disguise for something else. He must have some real motive for creating them and taking so much trouble about them. The reason one comes to talk as if he really had this impossible love is our utter failure to find out that real motive. What does he stand to make out of them? That is the insoluble question. I do not see that it can do any harm to tell you that this very problem was a chief cause of our father's quarrel with the enemy. When the creation of man was first mooted, and when, even at that stage, the enemy freely confessed that he foresaw a certain episode about a cross, our father very naturally sought an interview and asked for an explanation. The enemy gave no reply except to produce the cock and bull story about disinterested love, which he's been circulating ever since. This our father naturally could not accept. He implored the enemy to lay his cards on the table and gave him every opportunity. He admitted that he felt a real anxiety to know the secret. The enemy replied, I wish with all my heart that you did. It was, I imagine, at this stage in the interview that our father's disgust at such an unprovoked lack of confidence caused him to remove himself an infinite distance from the presence with a suddenness which has given rise to the ridiculous enemy's story that he was forcibly thrown out of heaven. Since then, we have begun to see why our oppressor was so secretive. His throne depends on the secret. Members of his faction have frequently admitted that if we ever came to understand what he means by love, the war would be over and we should re enter heaven. And there lies the great task. We know that he cannot really love. Nobody can. It doesn't make sense. If we could only find out what he is really up to. Hypothesis after hypothesis has been tried, and still we can't find out. Yet we must never lose hope. More and more complicated theories, fuller and fuller collections of data, richer rewards for researchers who make progress, more and terrible punishment for those who fail. All this, pursued and accelerated to the very end of time, cannot surely fail to succeed. You complain that my last letter does not make it clear whether I regard being in love as a desirable state for a human or not. But really, Wormwood, that's the sort of question one expects them to ask. Leave them to discuss whether love or patriotism or celibacy or candles on the altars or teetotalism or education is good or bad. Can't you see there's no answer? Nothing matters at all except the tendency of a given state of mind in given circumstances to move a particular patient at a particular moment nearer to the enemy or nearer to us. Thus, it would be quite a good thing to make the patient decide that love is good or bad. If he's an arrogant man with a contempt for the body, really based on delicacy, but mistaken by him for purity, and one who takes pleasure in flouting what most of his fellows approve, by all means let him decide against love. Instill into him an overweening asceticism, and then, when you have separated his sexuality from all that might humanize it, weigh in on him with it in some much more brutal and cynical form. If, on the other hand, he's an emotional, gullible man, feed him on minor poets and fifth rate novelists of the old school until you've made him believe that love is both irresistible and somehow intrinsically meritorious. This belief is not much help, I grant you, in producing casual unchastity, but it is an incomparable recipe for the prolonged, noble, romantic, tragic adulteries, ending, if all goes well, in murders and suicides. Failing that, it can be used to steer the patient into a useful marriage. For marriage, though the enemy's invention, has its uses, there must be several young women in your patient's neighborhood who would render the Christian life intensely difficult to him if only you could persuade him to marry one of them. Please send me a report on this when you next write. In the meantime, get it quite clear in your own mind that this state of falling in love is not in itself necessarily favorable either to us or to the other side. It's simply an occasion which we and the enemy are both trying to exploit. Like most of the other things which humans are excited about, such as health and sickness, age and youth, or war and peace, it is, from the point of view of the spiritual life, mainly raw material. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Screwtape begins this letter excusing himself, referencing either things that he now says he was joking about, but the one that I think would be the key one that he springboards into is his reference in the previous letter about how the enemy, which be God, really loves the vermin, us, that he really loves us. So he's correcting that mistake, and then continues in the letter about how that's not possible. That there must be a motive, there must be a reason. There's no way that God could love us with a love that doesn't gain him anything. And reflecting on that, the because that love in which we're given by God, we're given by Jesus, invites us into not only that relationship with him, but gives us everything that he is. He wants to give us that relationship, that love, and invites us into that relationship and into that love. And sometimes I know in my own life it seems that I have to fight to believe in that love. But what really becomes the kicker, the rub, is the fact that I need to love like Christ. I need to love like that. God's inviting me to love him and others with his love. And that is that can be very daunting. That can be it can seem impossible. And as we know, when I'm left with my own merits, it is impossible. And that's why Screwtape wants nothing more than to teach Wormwood how to keep us constantly distracted from the truth of his love, of God's love. And because the more I come to know, or the more we come to know of that relationship with Christ, then I can love like him because I'm becoming more like him. And what's interesting is how Lewis puts in something for us to think about, as Screwtape says that, you know, these humans are have believed that we, being the evil spirits, the evil one, were thrown away from God, thrown out of heaven. And uh, Lewis posits the thought that they willfully chose to separate themselves from God. And that then brings into thought that sin is when I choose to separate myself from my relationship with God through my action or through my inaction. And because I'm sure Screwtape loves the fact that, I think more and more of our society, you know, we kind of, well, we kind of believe, and a lot of times we just flat out believe that, well, there's not, I'm not really going to go to hell or things like that. And yet, if I can so easily choose to step away from God, and I don't know if I'd say most people don't necessarily use that language, but yet the amount of neglect that we give to God through lack of prayer, through lack of charity with one another, that that it if I can so easily neglect my relationship with God and with one another, why would I not necessarily think I can do it in eternal life? Um, so I appreciated Lewis's uh, how he deposited that thought with Screwtape on that the evil one is the one who chose to separate himself from God. It gives me thought in my own spiritual journey.
Well, and at the very least, it is very representative of our agency, our responsibility for the separation that we have from God, in that we choose that separation. It's part of our fallen nature to make that choice. And I, it's interesting. Screwtape spends so much time in this letter trying to undermine and debunk the notion of God's unselfish one way love toward us, because they can't comprehend it. Oh, I one of the things that struck me was, well, maybe it's true that hell doesn't really comprehend fully what God means by love, because they are not creative in and of themselves. We don't have, any indication that demons create more demons, whereas God created everything, and we have a part in that, in bringing the next generation of humans. So there's an opportunity there for us to on a small scale comprehend that selfless love that God has for us toward our own children, as imperfect as our copy of that love is. And they would like Screwtape would like nothing more than to undermine our belief in that type of love, because if we don't believe that God loved us first, that He loves us unselfishly enough uh, to have come and made the sacrifice on the cross for us, as Screwtape references there, then that continues our separation. It divides us continually from God. If we don't believe in His love for us in that way, that He actually does invite us into relationship with Him, and that he uses Screwtape uses the term disinterested, and I had mentioned that in some ways that's a straw man, because God's love in us isn't disinterested. He's very interested. Now, that doesn't mean that he has something tangible to gain from us except for the relationship that he desires. And so he is interested in our well-being and in us, but it's not a selfish interest. It's one in which he would like to restore that relationship that has been broken, as you said. um, the enemy father, our father below, as Screwtape references him. Yeah, he made the choice to separate himself from God. Now, whether or not he was cast from heaven, that's a whole nother discussion. But he did choose disobedience and to separate, and we've done exactly the same thing.
I was thinking of, how often I might have said, and you hear people, when we experience some sort of struggle in our life, something that maybe hits us to the core, and we might say directly or in some other fashion, why is God, doing this to me? I'm a good person. Um, someone might say, I go to church, I don't hurt anybody. And and to me that cuts right down to it. And that for me, that's another way of not believing that God has already loved me, and he can love me beyond. His love is greater than any struggle I can have, any hurt that I can have. And that's how, Screwtape he uses that thought process, obviously, to use it against us, to really believe that in that moment, and in that moment of struggle, of strife, that God actually gives me an opportunity to reorient myself towards that love, to recognize, to beg, for faith that even though I'm experiencing whatever this might be, I know that you still love me, that your love is greater than this. Um, and I and I think this is where Screwtape is really. We're almost asking, I think, the same question as Screwtape can't believe is, can I believe that his love is greater than whatever I'm experiencing at this moment? And therefore, it becomes an opportunity for me of faith. Screwtape wants to use that as an opportunity for despair.
Absolutely. And we've touched on it before. God doesn't promise those who have faith in him that our lives are going to be easy. And that prosperity theology has been so damaging over the last century or so, that this notion that we are somehow given supernatural protection from everything bad that happens in this life. Quite the contrary. We're told that we will have tribulation, and that if the world hated Jesus, that it's gonna hate us as his followers. So difficulties in life and sickness and death, we're not promised that somehow we're going to be spared those things on this plane. That we are going to experience life just like everyone else does, with its ups and its downs. And being able to hold on to, yes, that notion that God's love is in fact greater, that it came first, it goes before me, it surrounds me in so many ways. Being able to hold on to that is difficult. That is a test of faith, but it doesn't change the truth. And Screwtape would really like us in those moments to say, well, yeah, God's love isn't real. He let this happen, and so he can't really be paying attention. He can't really be good. And to let that separate us from him. Much the same way he goes on to talk about, is this love or being in love? Is this a good or a bad thing? And he tells Wormwood, well, you're kind of asking the wrong question, because there are so many things in humans' lives that they label good or bad, that we really just need to take an opportunity out of those to whichever direction your human chooses on these things. Be prepared to use that against him, to keep driving that wedge in between him and God. And it's no different a tool than this notion of convincing us that God's love is not real.
And with that same thought, the I find these letters helpful, as Lewis intends, is to see not only how the evil one, how Screwtape, how he tries to work, how he tries to make that wedge, and as you said, he corrects Wormwood and says, you're, like you said, you're asking the wrong question. You can use whatever you need, use whatever is given to you to try to distract him, to try to bring him away. And yet God can use our present situation for his greater purpose, even our suffering, to be able, whether it helps us to purge whatever selfishness might be within us. Even our own sin is an opportunity for conversion, and that's the great scandal of the cross for the evil one and for the world, is that action, that cross, can bring about eternal life, can bring about justification. And that, and I think for myself, for us, for our viewers, and is, to have that mindset to say, how does the evil one want to distract us in any situation? But God, more importantly, is always desiring that conversion to him, but always to that relationship. He's always seeking us. He doesn't stop seeking us and loving us, and desiring, as you said, desiring. He has a eternal interest in us, and not to stop believing in that. And that's what Screwtape wants to distract us from.
And as he said, using any circumstance or decision in our lives as raw material. Just uh, learn, he's telling Wormwood, learn to twist anything around, as long as it can be used to drive that wedge between your patient and the enemy, God. Well, folks, I do sincerely pray that whatever circumstances you're facing in your life, that you do understand God's love is a very real love. It's the definition of love. It is unselfish. It came first, and it goes before you, and it would like to surround you and include you mutually in a restored relationship with him. I sincerely hope that if you have not found that you'd seek it, because there is nothing in life that is quite like living in relationship with God through Christ. With that, folks, we will see you next week. Light something you like. Ponder some stuff till then.